Dear listener, let us slow our steps for a moment and step inside a space not often seen in full light. The federal courtroom prepared for a Mafia trial. Not the grand mahogany halls of television drama, where every line is delivered with theatrical flourish, but something quieter, more intimate, and more deeply fraught with a tension that is almost alive. Picture it now, if you will, a pale beige room where echoes clung to scuffed linoleum floors and the very air is thick with a gravity more palpable than dust. It is a room designed for function, not comfort, a place where the architecture of justice is stripped to its most essential, and therefore most intimidating. Form, the smell, is a sterile mix of old paper, industrial cleaning fluid, and the faint anxious sweat of humanity. The lighting is clinical, a cold and unforgiving bath of illumination. Fluorescent panels set into the ceiling hum with a faint, persistent electronic sigh, casting a stark, unwavering brightness that does nothing to ease the nerves of those seated beneath it. There is no warm hearthglow here, no gentle lamplight, to soften the hard edges of truth. This is a light that exposes, that leaves no corner for a comfortable shadow. Rows of pew, like benches, that were dark and worn smooth by years of friction, stretch out like tired witnesses themselves. They hold a stoic collection of observers, reporters with brows furrowed in concentration, their pens poised over notepads, and families gripping tissues in crumpled, damp hands, their faces a canvas of hope and dread. In the front of the room, a long, polished table of dark oak stands between the accused and the prosecution. A line drawn in legal wood, a chasm that cannot be crossed. On one side sit the defendants, men whose names have been whispered in fear on street corners, now seated in ill-fitting suits, their usual swagger replaced by a tense, coiled stillness. Their lawyers, sharp and alert, shuffle papers, their whispers, a low current beneath the room's humming silence. On the other side is the prosecution team, their faces etched with a focused intensity, their files stacked high, a testament to months, or even years, of painstaking investigation. This table is the battlefield, and the weapons are words, memories, and the crushing weight of evidence. Behind the witness stand, almost tucked away, is a small desk where a court reporter sits, a figure of profound concentration. Her fingers dance a silent, hypnotic rhythm on the keys of a stenograph machine, capturing every word, every stutter, every pregnant pause. She is the room's memory, a living recorder, turning fleeting human speech into an indelible record, a transcript that will outlast the emotions of the day. To her right, looming over the entire scene, is the judge's bench, a raised island of carved wood, a fortress of judicial authority. It is here that the black robes sit above it all, the figure of the judge not untouched by the palpable weight in the room, but insulated by years of experience and the sacred duty of impartiality. The judge watches, always watching, with a solemn gravity that speaks of sleepless nights spent poring over case law and careful words, chosen to ensure the scales of justice remain balanced. The face is a study in neutrality, but the eyes miss nothing, a silent fulcrum upon which the entire proceeding pivots. But your eyes, dear listener, are inevitably drawn to the chair just to the left of the judge's bench. The witness stand. It is not a throne, nor is it a place of honor. It is a simple seat, a wooden chair elevated slightly, just enough to separate its occupant from everyone else. It is enclosed by a low wooden rail, a barrier that feels less like protection and more like a cage. A slender, silver microphone is clipped discreetly to a small gooseneck stand in front, a cold, unblinking ear waiting to carry a voice into the official record. And beside it, a single glass of water, half filled and already sweating tiny beads of condensation despite the artificial chill of the room. It sits as a small, silent acknowledgement of human frailty, of the dry throat that comes with fear. It is here, in this simple, lonely chair, that everything shifts. The entire ecosystem of the courtroom stills when a witness is called. The low murmur of lawyers conferring ceases. The rustle of papers dies. Conversations die in throats. Pens pause mid-sentence. And in the sudden, profound silence, you can almost hear the collective heartbeat of the room pick up its tempo. One name, spoken clearly by the prosecutor or the clerk, echoes in the unnaturally quiet space. All eyes, like 100 tiny searchlights, turn to one spot in the gallery. The bailiff, a uniformed figure of quiet authority, nods gently, a silent command. And someone, perhaps you, if we are imagining this journey together, rises from the hard bench. Shoes scuff softly along the thin, utilitarian carpet. The sound is magnified in the hush, each footfall a drumbeat, marking a slow, deliberate march. It is a short walk in distance, but an immense journey in significance. Each step is both an ascent to a place of terrible importance and an offering of one's own peace of mind. You feel the gaze of everyone in the room, the curious, the hostile, the hopeful. You pass the prosecution table, their encouraging, tight smiles offering little comfort. You pass the defense table, and the eyes of the accused fall upon you, a physical weight. You take your seat. The old chair creaks beneath your weight, a small, protesting groan that sounds like a cannon blast in the silence. The microphone is adjusted by the bailiff, its metallic head now pointing directly at your mouth. You are asked to raise your right hand. It feels heavy, a strange appendage you are no longer in full control of. You are asked to swear an oath, the words spoken by the clerk in a calm, practiced monotone that belies their earth-shattering importance. The words, so familiar from films and television, carry a new, terrifying weight when spoken against the backdrop of real and present danger. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? A nod, a whispered, dry-throated "I do," and then a silence that feels deeper and more absolute than any you have ever known. Outside these beige walls, cars honk in afternoon traffic, dogs bark in distant yards. The vibrant, chaotic world continues its relentless forward motion. But here, inside this room, time thickens. The courtroom becomes a capsule, a hermetically sealed vessel, a suspended moment in the slow, grinding river of justice. You feel the gaze of the accused settle on you like a physical shadow. Sometimes it's steely and sharp, a look that tries to pierce your resolve. Sometimes it's vacant, unreadable, the flat, dead eyes of a predator conserving its energy. And other times, perhaps the hardest times of all, it's the gaze of someone you knew, someone who shared a meal in your kitchen, whose voice once called your name with affection or easy familiarity. The betrayal, if that is what it is to be, called, cuts both ways, a blade sharpened on shared history. The prosecutor, a man whose entire case may hinge on what you are about to say, clears his throat. The small sound is the signal. The questions begin. They start gently, lulling you into a rhythm. Your name, your address, your occupation, simple facts to ground you, to establish you as a person in this sterile environment. Then he takes you back. You are asked to recall a Tuesday night 3 years ago. Not the whole night, just a sliver of it. To remember the way the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the cracked sidewalk. The specific, sharp sound of a car door slamming, shut in the echoing quiet of a late hour. The huddled figures you saw near the back entrance of the diner. You close your eyes for a moment, and it returns. Not like a movie replaying in perfect clarity, but like a dream half remembered upon waking. It is a mosaic of broken images, shards of sensation, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the muffled sound of angry voices, the glint of something metallic under a dim security light. You reach for the truth with trembling fingers, afraid of what you might touch, of the sleeping beast you are about to wake. Each answer you give, each detail you excavate from the deep well of your memory, builds something fragile and yet immensely strong. A scaffold of truth that others, you know, will soon try to tear down with all their might. The defense lawyer's turn comes, and the atmosphere in the room shifts again. The air grows colder, sharper. His voice may be calm, even courteous, but every word is a scalpel, designed to dissect, to discredit, to dismantle. Are you absolutely sure it was a Tuesday? Isn't it true that you had been drinking that night, just a few beers with friends? You were tired, weren't you, after a long shift? How can we be certain, how can this jury be certain, that your memory is reliable? You swallow against the lump in your throat. Your palm is slick with sweat as you grip the smooth, worn edge of the stand. The water glass seems a mile away. You look at the jury, a dozen ordinary faces trying to make sense of this extraordinary story. You take a breath, you speak anyway, and behind you, beyond the polished benches and the solemn bailiff, sits the quiet, potent presence of those who are watching. Not just the journalists, scribbling notes for tomorrow's column, their interest professional, detached. No, there are others, men in expensive suits, with hard eyes and soft, dangerous voices. Friends of the accused, associates, their gazes promise nothing kind. They are not here for justice. They are here to bear witness to your testimony, to remember your face, to send a silent, chilling message that reverberates far beyond these courtroom walls. And still you speak. In the gallery, a mother clutches a small, framed photograph of her son. A smiling young man in a graduation gown, taken before he was caught in the crossfire of a deal gone wrong in a grocery store parking lot. Her tears are silent, but her presence is a scream. A few rows back, a daughter, no older than 10, clutches the hand of her father, her brow furrowed in confusion. Too young to understand why the man with the menacing mustache keeps looking at them, but old enough to feel the cold dread in the room. They, too, are waiting for your words. Your truth is their only hope for a reckoning. And what of the judge? She watches, her expression still largely unreadable, a mask of judicial temperament. But every so often you see her blink slowly, a deliberate, thoughtful motion, as if reminding herself to stay human in a room that too often demands a face of stone. She sees it all, the fear, the intimidation, the grief, the slow, painful construction of a verdict. So the story unfolds, piece by painful piece. Testimony builds like a cathedral, stone by spoken stone. Some facts are disputed, others laid bare, for all to see. You finish your time in the chair, feeling breathless, scoured out, utterly depleted. The prosecutor thanks you, his voice low and sincere. You are told you may step down. Your feet feel heavier than before, as if you have absorbed all the gravity you've displaced. The bailiff opens a side door for you, and the muffled noise of the outside world comes rushing back in. A sudden, shocking return to ordinary life, but something lingers inside that courtroom, something you have left behind, invisible yet weighty. The echo of your words, hanging in the rafters like sacred incense. The truth, perhaps, not pure, not perfect, because memory is never perfect, but enough. It is a tangible thing now, a part of the official record, a force that cannot be recalled. Tonight, dear listener, as you rest your head against your pillow in the safety of your own home, I hope you remember this, that courage does not always roar like a lion. Sometimes it is the quiet, quaking voice of an ordinary person who walks into a beige courtroom, sits in a lonely chair, and speaks with a voice just above a whisper, and the world shifts. Ever so slightly, because of it. There are crossroads in life that come quietly, without fanfare, without a signpost declaring their importance. It is just a conversation on a back porch under a summer moon, a moment of overheard truth through a thin apartment wall, a silence that becomes too loud to ignore. So it is for those who find themselves holding a piece of knowledge that could sway a Mafia trial. It does not feel like a moment of heroism when it first arrives. It feels like a burden, a heavy stone dropped into the calm waters of one's life, one that tightens the chest, frays the nerves, and steals sleep. You might be a friend of a friend, a distant cousin, a bartender who served more than drinks and kept your eyes open. Perhaps you were the mechanic who noticed the strange contents of a trunk, or the accountant who saw numbers that didn't add up. Perhaps you just noticed too much, an odd exchange of a thick envelope in a quiet cafe, a sudden, unexplained disappearance of a neighbor, a whispered threat spoken with casual cruelty when someone thought you weren't listening. And then, one day, the knock comes. Not a bang, but a gentle, persistent rap on the door. Two federal agents, with their quiet, patient eyes and carefully chosen words. They don't threaten, they don't cajole. They simply lay out the facts. They say your testimony matters. They say it could be the piece that makes the whole puzzle fall into place, that it could make a difference. But oh, dear listener, what a monumental choice it is. To testify is not simply to tell a story in a courtroom. It is to take a match to the entire landscape of one's life. Safety, routine, family, the simple, blessed anonymity of a normal existence. All of these things become unsteady, fragile. A torrent of questions floods the mind in the dark hours of the night. Will they come after me? Will they find my family? What if I'm wrong about what I saw? What will my neighbors think when they see my name in the paper? Will I lose my job? And deeper still, the question that doesn't always have a name, the one that whispers from the darkest part of your soul. Who am I if I do this? And who will I become? Some feel the irresistible call of conscience, a voice that cannot be silenced. Perhaps it is the memory of a child's innocent question. Why does no one ever stop the bad men, Papa? Or a haunting image of a friend who vanished into thin air after a quiet, chilling warning. Others are simply worn thin by the corrosive weight of complicity, by the years of looking away, of pretending not to see, of telling themselves it was none of their business. The silence has become a heavier burden than the truth, and still, others speak because they have already lost something too precious to let that silence stand. A brother gunned down in a senseless dispute over territory, a sister who trusted the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. For them, testimony is not a choice, but a debt, an obligation to the past that cannot be repaid with anything but the raw, unvarnished truth. This decision is not made once, in a single, dramatic moment. It is made over and over again. It is made every time the phone rings late at night, your heart leaping into your throat. It is made when you see a car linger too long on your street. It is made when you look at your own children playing in the yard and wonder what kind of legacy you are leaving them, a legacy of fear or one of courage. And yet, in the quiet, agonizing hours of decision, some find a strange and unexpected clarity. Not peace, perhaps, for peace is a luxury they may never know again, but purpose. They begin to imagine a world where fewer people have to make this terrifying choice. A world where justice does not rely on bravery wrung from the depths of fear. And after weeks of internal torment, they pick up the phone. And they say yes. They agree to speak, to stand up, not because they are fearless, but because they are deeply, profoundly afraid, and still choose to act in spite of that fear. In the end, it is a choice made alone, often in the deafening silence, between two heartbeats. But when it is made, something fundamental changes. The first thin crack of light slips through a door that had been sealed shut, and from that moment on, the long and difficult journey has begun. There's a certain stillness that comes when one realizes they are the only voice breaking a silence that is centuries deep. Not the defiant, energized stillness of a protest rally, but a lonelier, colder quiet, the kind that creeps into your bones when you know the path ahead holds no cheering crowds, only the desolate echo of your own footsteps. When a witness steps forward in a Mafia trial, they rarely do so with company. The code of omerta, the sacred vow of silence, is a powerful force, and its shadow falls far beyond the inner circles of the organization. Friends you have known for decades suddenly cross the street to avoid you. Family members grow distant, their conversations strained, their eyes full of a new, fearful caution. Old neighbors, who once waved from their porches, now quickly turn away, their doors closing with a quiet finality. Those who stay silent are left untouched by the tremors of justice, but the one who speaks. They become marked, not in ink or with a physical brand, but in memory, in the collective consciousness of a community governed by fear. Imagine, dear one, walking into your familiar corner store for a carton of milk and seeing the clerk, a man who once greeted you with a warm joke and a smile, now lower his eyes, his hands fumbling with your change, desperate to end the transaction. Imagine your usual church pew, once a place of comfort and community, now left empty on either side. The warmth of fellowship replaced with a chilling aura of suspicion and judgment. The phone rings less and less often. The invitations to weddings and baptisms stop arriving. You become a ghost in your own life long before your time. Some are relocated, of course, spirited away by federal marshals and placed into protection programs with new names, new homes, new fabricated identities. But protection, while life-saving, is not a substitute for connection. These witnesses live among strangers in a new town, a new state, unable to speak of who they truly were, of the life they left behind. They cannot share the stories that shaped them, cannot explain why they wake up sweating in the middle of the night, or why they check the locks on their doors 3 times before going to bed. It is a strange sort of existence, a safety found only in a vacuum, and for those who remain in their own cities, choosing to brave the storm. The isolation can be even sharper, more acute. They move through familiar streets that no longer feel like home, every face a potential threat, every passing car a source of anxiety. Their children face cruel whispers and shunning at school. Their mail arrives, torn, or sometimes not at all. And yet they persist. There is a profound and quiet strength in standing alone. It is not the strength of brawn or of bold, public declarations. It is the quiet, stubborn endurance of the human spirit, to speak and to keep speaking, when the silence that follows is louder and more damning than any applause could ever be. To hold on to the fragile vessel of the truth, even when no one around you will meet your eyes. But this profound loneliness is not always the end of the story. Sometimes, miraculously, a single voice echoes far enough to find another. One witness's courage, reported in the papers or whispered about in hushed tones, sparks a flicker of bravery in a second person, then a third. A slow, tentative chain of courage begins to form, lighting up like distant stars, one by one, in a vast and overwhelming darkness. And in time, what was once a solitary cry for justice can become a chorus. Until then, however, the lone voice must carry on. In the sterile courtroom, under the harsh, unforgiving lights. In their home, behind drawn curtains and bolted doors. And in their own heart, where the truth rests like a stone, heavy, immovable, and unwavering. Tonight, as you settle beneath your blankets, in the warmth and safety of your bed, imagine for a moment that kind of solitude, not to frighten you, dear listener, but to remind you of the incredible strength that quietly lives in so many unseen places. The ones who speak, though they are alone. The ones who shine their small light, even when no one else seems to see. They are the candle in the dark, and their light, however faint it may seem, changes everything. There is a compass within each of us, dear listener, not one of polished steel or sensitive magnetism, but of something older, something softer. It is a compass carved from the values whispered to us in childhood, from the steady, gentle hands of those who raised us, from bedtime stories where good triumphed over wrong, even if it was just barely. And when faced with the crushing weight of an unspeakable truth, that inner compass begins to stir, its needle quivering with a silent, insistent urgency. For many witnesses in Mafia trials, the decision to speak is not born from a sudden surge of courage alone, but from a deep, unshakable, and often reluctant sense of what must be done. Even as fear coils tight around the chest like a hungry serpent, even as threats, spoken and unspoken, loom like storm clouds over every corner of life, the needle of conscience insists on pointing north. It is a quiet, stubborn guide in a world of noise and danger. Consider the aging shopkeeper who watched a man bleed out on the pavement in front of his store. Knowing the killer by name, a local figure everyone feared. For months, he tells himself it's not his place, not his business. He has a family to think about. But the memory won't fade. It lingers in the reflection of his own face in the shop window each morning as he opens the shutters. It is there. As he cleans the stoop where the blood once pooled, a stain no amount of bleach can truly erase from his mind. And one day, after the federal agents return for the third time with their patient, sorrowful eyes, he simply nods his head, his shoulders slumped in weary resignation. He doesn't speak of justice in grand heroic terms. He simply says, his voice thick with emotion, someone has to say it. It just isn't right. Or imagine the grandmother whose beloved grandson fell in with a dangerous company of men. She watched helplessly as the light in his eyes dimmed, as he disappeared into late nights, angry silences, and unexplained wealth. When he vanished for good, leaving nothing but a cold space at the dinner table, she found his leather-bound notebook hidden under the mattress, a ledger filled with names, dates, and places. And though her heart broke anew with every page she turned, she wrapped it in a dish towel, took 3 buses to the courthouse, and handed it to a startled clerk. She did not cry. She simply said, her voice steady and clear, "I don't want this to happen to someone else's child." The moral compass does not erase fear, dear listener. That is not its function. But it gives fear a powerful counterweight. It steadies trembling hands long enough to sign a statement. It gives quiet, halting words a spine of steel. In the courtroom, when asked by a skeptical defense attorney why they have chosen to testify, to risk so much, many witnesses do not deliver heroic speeches. They speak plainly, with a devastating simplicity. It was the right thing to do. It is a statement that, in its quiet power, bears more weight than any threat. For the Mafia, whose entire empire rests on the foundation of fear, on silence, on a twisted loyalty that supersedes the law, this simple declaration is a small, personal revolution. A person who follows the dictates of their own conscience cannot be bought, cannot be easily cowed. And while they may pay dearly for their decision in the currency of peace and safety, they light a torch that others, hiding in the shadows, might one day follow. Yet it is not always so clear, so black and white. The compass wavers, at times buffeted by storms of guilt and doubt. Some witnesses struggle profoundly with the idea of betrayal, for turning on a friend, a brother, even a former lover. They wonder if they are hypocrites, if their testimony is compromised by their own past complicity. But even in this murky, grey space, the compass nudges them forward. It does not demand perfection of them. It only demands honesty. And so they walk into that courtroom with their shoulders heavy, but their heads held just high enough. They speak not to punish, but to preserve. Not out of a thirst for vengeance, but out of a solemn duty to something larger than themselves, perhaps to the child in the 3rd row of the gallery, clutching her mother's hand, or perhaps to the countless strangers who might be saved from another bullet, another buried secret, another family destroyed. We often imagine moral strength as a trumpet blast, a cinematic moment of thunderous defiance. But in truth, it is often the soft, weary voice at a kitchen table, the quiet signing of a formal statement under the hum of fluorescent lights, the long, deep exhale before answering a difficult question under oath. It is the breath that says, "I cannot look away any longer." Tonight, as you let your own thoughts drift and settle in the quiet of your room, listen for your own compass. You needn't be facing such grave and perilous decisions to feel its gentle, persistent tug. It whispers in the small choices too, in acts of kindness when it is not required, in a commitment to fairness, in the small, everyday truths we dare to tell. And if you ever doubt its direction, remember the witness in the courtroom, wrapped in a cloak of fear but guided by something greater, something truer. For them, the path was not easy or clear, but the calling was. And sometimes, dear listener, that is more than enough to change the world. At first, the words fall softly, barely audible beyond the confines of the witness stand. A name, a date, a location scribbled on the fragile parchment of memory and retrieved with painstaking care. The room leans in, not just physically, but spiritually, as if the very walls of the courthouse know that something significant, something irreversible, is stirring. A whisper, after all, does not have to shout to be heard. It only needs to be. True, this final piece of our journey together tonight begins with the seemingly simple idea that no single voice can possibly topple the vast, deeply rooted architecture of organized crime. It seems an impossible task, one person against a dynasty of fear. And yet, remarkably, it happens again and again, because that one voice, in its terrifying solitude, inspires others. Because the truth, once spoken aloud into an official record, refuses to be contained. It travels. It takes on a life of its own. The Mafia has long relied on secrecy as its most impenetrable fortress. Fear is its currency, violence its enforcer, but silence, a pervasive, suffocating silence, is its most faithful and powerful ally. But testimony, authentic, detailed, unflinching testimony, has a strange and potent power. It acts like a solvent. On this fortress of fear, it cracks the smooth, confident facade. It sends tremors of paranoia and distrust through the ranks. One day, a high-ranking capo is named under oath. The next, the location of a hidden safe house is confirmed by a second source. Before long, a pattern emerges. Charges are filed. Clandestine. Operations are dismantled, and entire criminal enterprises that once seemed invincible begin to unravel from the inside out. Consider, dear listener, the case of Joseph Falati in the early 1960s, the very first made man to publicly break the code of omerta and testify against the organization he once served. His words, shared in hushed congressional hearings and televised moments that captivated a nation, pierced the thick veil of myth and secrecy. He gave America and the world what it was not supposed to know: names, rituals, blood oaths, murders. He gave the shadowy organization a name, La Cosa Nostra. The whisper became a roar that echoed across the country. And through him, through his singular act of defiance, others found their footing, realizing that the silence could, in fact, be broken. Or think of the witnesses of the landmark commission trial in the 1980s, when the leadership of the five powerful New York families was finally exposed and brought to justice. Each witness testified under the constant looming threat of death. But with every sentence they uttered, the narrative of impunity that had protected these men for decades began to shift and crumble. Their stories built upon one another, corroborating details, confirming timelines, forming a wall of evidence so high and so solid that the Mafia could not scale it. These aren't just legal victories recorded in dusty law books. They are profound moral victories. For every verdict rendered, there is a family that can finally breathe a sigh of relief, a neighborhood that sleeps a little more soundly, a small business owner who no longer has to pay a tax of fear, a child who will grow up without the casual presence of violence etched into the fabric of their daily lives. But let us not romanticize this arduous journey. The cost of shifting history is steep, and it is paid by these individuals in the currency of their own lives. Some witnesses enter protection programs and never again use their real names, living out their days as ghosts of their former selves. Some are forced to live in permanent obscurity, always looking over their shoulders, forever separated from the people and places they once loved. And others, those the system tragically failed to protect, never lived to see the verdict their bravery helped to secure, and still more step forward. Because when one person dares to speak, it gives silent permission for others to do the same. That is the miraculous nature of courage. It is contagious. A whisper encourages a second, which gives heart to a third. And soon, what began as a single, trembling voice is no longer alone. It is not just a voice, but a chorus. It is not merely testimony, it is transformation. So tonight, as we close this chapter in our journey together, let us remember that every whisper matters. Yours, mine, theirs. In the small choices and the great ones, a single voice speaking a simple truth can set in motion events that ripple outward in ways we can never fully anticipate. And let us honor those who risked everything, their peace, their safety, their very lives, so that the truth might not be buried forever beneath an avalanche of fear. Let their courage echo in the quiet places of our own hearts. History does not shift all at once in a grand seismic event. It begins, always, with a whisper, and in time, that whisper becomes a roar. To understand the peril of being a witness in a Mafia trial, one must first walk through the history of silence itself. The word omerta does not merely signify secrecy, is a way of life, a cultural spine running through the communities where organized crime took root. Born in the hills of Sicily and carried across the ocean in the hearts of immigrants, it is more than a code. It is survival, pride, identity. Omerta is not written on paper or signed in ink. It is passed down in stories, in warnings murmured over soup, in glances shared between father and son. We do not talk about what is not ours to speak. That is the creed, sometimes softened into wisdom, sometimes hardened into law. It emerged from places where trust in official justice was a luxury, not a given. In rural Italy, peasants had little faith in the state to protect them. In these regions, self-policing became the norm. One did not go to the police. One went to the local donhu would resolve disputes, punish wrongdoing, and reward loyalty. To betray this network was to betray the only protection one had. When Italian immigrants arrived in America, many brought this outlook with them, not out of malice, but necessity. In neighborhoods where poverty was deep and discrimination was daily, the state still felt distant and cold. The Mafia, for some, was not a threat. It was a shadowy provider offering jobs, loans, protection. Speaking against it was like speaking against a relative. Thus, the silence grew roots, and when witnesses broke it, they did more than provide testimony. They violated a generational covenant, one often held sacred by family and community alike. They stepped outside a circle that, for better or worse, had once shielded them, and in doing so, they became not only informants but pariahs. So, as we begin this next chapter, remember, to testify against the Mafia is not just to defy criminals. It is to stand against a deeply woven tapestry of history, kinship, and survival. To speak under the shadow of omerta is to cut a thread that many fear must never be severed, and yet some do, and because they do, a different future begins to take shape. Step softly with me now, dear listener, into the narrow corridors of tenement buildings and corner bakeries, into neighborhoods where everyone knew what not to say. Here, silence was not simply an expectation, it was a shield. It was how people protected their own, not only from law enforcement, but from the unpredictable wrath of the men who ruled the underworld from the back of cafes and funeral homes. For many in these tight-knit communities, the Mafia was not some distant menace cloaked in mythology. It was family. It was the neighbor who paid your rent when you fell behind. It was the man who walked your daughter safely to the school gate. It was the woman who looked the other way when certain goods were offloaded at midnight. There was a code to it all. You did not ask questions about what happened to the man who vanished. You did not mention the envelope of cash passed under the counter. You turned up the volume on your radio when raised voices drifted through your apartment. Walls. And if the police came knocking, you hadn't seen a thing. This wasn't necessarily because people supported crime. Often, It was because they felt trapped in a world where the police seemed more likely to punish than protect, where the court system was distant and alien, and where retribution from the Mafia was immediate and intimate. In such a place, complicity did not always feel like a choice. It was woven into survival. A mother raising 3 children alone might serve espresso to a local mobster every morning, knowing he helped keep the streets clean of petty thieves. An elderly shopkeeper might hand over a small cut of his earnings each week, calling it respect, but knowing it bought him a kind of fragile peace. And then there were those who saw silence as a moral act, an allegiance to a different kind of order. To them, outsiders, even well-meaning authorities, were intrusions into an ecosystem that policed itself. The Mafia punished those who harmed the elderly, kept the drugs out of certain blocks, and maintained a twisted sense of honor. Speaking to the authorities wasn't just dangerous, it was disloyal. This is how silence became not just protection, but identity. Entire communities came to see themselves as keepers of their own fate, bound not by law, but by blood, fear, and shared history. And when someone chose to testify, it felt like a betrayal of all of it, not only of the criminals, but of the neighbors, the unspoken agreements, the very glue that held the fragile order together. The witness became a rupture in the social fabric, a reminder that even deep roots can be pulled up. So when we hear of someone turning state's evidence, let us not dismiss the community's reaction as mere denial or cowardice. It is grief, it is fear, it is the tearing of something that had, for better or worse, kept life moving. Yet still, people do speak. They choose to rupture the silence. And in doing so, they challenge not only the Mafia, but the very culture that made silence feel like survival. So tonight, as you rest in your own quiet world, consider how powerful silence can be, how it can bind, shield, imprison, and define. And remember those who, at great cost, chose to break it, because from broken silence, sometimes more truthful peace begins to grow. Once, dear listener, these neighborhoods moved with a kind of unspoken rhythm, children playing stickball in the alleyways, bread baking behind corner store counters, stoops alive with summer gossip. But when omerta was broken, even once, the rhythm faltered. Suspicion crept in like mist through window panes. In places where silence had always been the truest form of loyalty, the sudden presence of a voice, an honest one, shifted the balance. It didn't matter who had spoken or what they had said. The very fact that someone had was enough to cast a pall over the entire street. Now, everyone looked sideways. A shopkeeper, once known for his generosity, became a subject of hushed rumors. He talks too much. A teenager who wore a new jacket stirred whispers. Where'd the money come from? A woman seen walking with a federal agent wasn't just seen. She was remembered. And it was not only the suspected who suffered. Suspicion became its own contagion. Trust, so carefully cultivated over years, could dissolve with one murmured accusation. Friends drifted apart. Churches emptied. Barbershops grew quieter. The very places meant to draw people together now became stages for silent performance. What's worse, even innocence could not shield someone. In this new world shaped by broken codes, silence was no longer enough. You had to be convincingly silent, demonstrably loyal, visibly uninvolved. Anything less invited scrutiny. It was not only dangerous to speak, it was dangerous to be suspected. Of speaking, this corrosion seeped into generations. Children learned early what could and could not be said, and to whom. They saw their parents flinch at a knock on the door. They heard the caution in every adult voice when certain names were mentioned. They understood, in the way only children can, that danger was woven into language. And so, a culture of doubt bloomed in the cracks of community. Ironically, it was the very fear that sustained omerta that also began to erode it. As more people spoke out, as more trials unfolded, the old trust could not be rebuilt. Suspicion reigned, and with it came an unraveling. A community built on silent consensus began to break apart under the weight of its own secrets, and yet, some saw in this suspicion a glimmer of truth. For the first time, questions were being asked. Authority figures were no longer beyond reproach. The whispers, while painful, were also signs that the veil was thinning. Trust, once fractured, may take generations to heal. But the beginning of that healing often starts with the shattering. So let us not look away from the discomfort of these unravelings. Let us see in them the growing pains of a truth long buried. For when trust is rebuilt not on silence, but on honesty, however hard won, that is, when a community begins to live anew. Even now, long after the notorious trials of the past century have receded into the history books, omerta lingers, not always in its strictest form, but as an undercurrent, quiet, persistent, and deeply human. In communities touched by organized crime, silence still casts its long shadow. It whispers in conversations cut short. It sits in the corners of family gatherings when certain names arise. It shapes how children are taught to speak and whom to trust. And for those who once dared to testify, the legacy of their courage is measured not only in justice rendered, but in the loneliness that followed. Yet there is something else that endures. A new generation, born of these stories, is learning a different rhythm. They see the cost of silence not only in violence, but in the erosion of trust, the weight of secrets, the fragility of community. They ask questions their parents were too afraid to ask. They look to elders not just for tradition, but for truth. In some neighborhoods, grassroots organizations now offer support to those caught in the crossfire of crime and silence. Former witnesses speak at schools. Community leaders advocate for safety through transparency, not fear. The process is slow, often painful, but it is movement. And within law enforcement, too, there is change. Officers trained to understand cultural nuances, programs that offer not just relocation, but trauma counseling, educational opportunities, long-term support. These are steps toward honoring the full price of testimony, not just in the courtroom, but in the life that comes after. Still, the road is long, because silence is easy. It is immediate. It protects in the short term, but it also corrodes. And those who speak, those who defy it, deserve not just legal protection, but public remembrance. So let us remember them. Let us remember the quiet bravery of a janitor who spoke up after witnessing a deal gone wrong. The young woman who, despite threats, named her brother's killer. The grandfather who testified after 30 years of silence. They are not just witnesses, they are weavers of a new story, one where truth is not a betrayal, but a beginning. Dear listener, if you've made it this far, you have walked through a shadowed landscape of human choice, fear, and resilience. Let your heart hold space for those who have risked everything, not for glory, but for a better tomorrow. The silence may still echo, but so does the courage that broke it, and that, perhaps, is the louder song. Asterisk. Now we step into the subtle and unnerving world of intimidation, where fear is seeded not by direct threat, but by presence, where the mere hint of being watched is enough to unnerve even the most steadfast witness. Imagine, dear listener, waking each morning to the same unfamiliar car, parked a little too close to your curb. A man reading a paper through dark sunglasses. A slow drive past your house every evening, headlights off. These are not just coincidences. They are signals. To be a witness in a mafia trial is to live in a world where observation is weaponized. It is not about confrontation, it is about control. The goal is to unsettle, to unravel, to make you question whether you were right to speak at all. Witnesses have recounted stories of footsteps behind them in grocery aisles, strangers who appear at gas stations miles from home, or calls where no one speaks, but breath is audible. This quiet surveillance forms a net, one that tightens, not with violence, but with suggestion. There is something particularly sinister in this brand of fear, because it isolates you without laying a hand. You begin to scan every crowd, to memorize license plates, to wonder who knows where you live. Friends notice your sudden alertness, your nervous glances, but they rarely understand the depth of the dread. Even when protection is offered, the feeling often lingers. For how do you protect someone from what they cannot prove? A stare, a shadow, a rumor, it's enough to shake the foundations of certainty, and the message is always the same. We see you, so tonight, think gently of those who live beneath this gaze, who must rise each day and carry on, watched but refusing to yield. They show us that courage is not only found in courtrooms, but in kitchens, in crosswalks, in the smallest acts of defiance. The eyes and the shadows may be real, but so is the strength that walks through them. Unbowed fear, when clothed in words, becomes more than suggestion, it becomes a message. And often these messages come wrapped in the ordinary, in the seemingly benign. A voicemail left at 3 a.m. with only breathing on the line. A handwritten note with no signature. A bouquet of flowers placed on a doorstep, beautiful and wordless, and yet laced with implication. These are the veiled threats that witnesses in mafia trials have long learnt to decipher. They do not scream danger, they whisper it, and in their subtlety lies their cruelty. Consider a man who opened his mailbox to find a newspaper article about a car bombing, circled in red. No words, no explanation, just the clear inference. This could be you, or a woman who found her pet's collar laid carefully on her front step while the animal itself was still missing. The message, silent, chilling, rang louder than any shouted threat. Sometimes it's not even what is said, but when. A phone call placed precisely at the hour a child walks home from school. A stranger who asks by name for your elderly mother. These actions are often legal, technically, but their impact, devastating. The purpose of such threats is rarely to follow through, but rather to haunt, to plant a seed of fear and let it grow wild in the mind, to make witnesses second-guess every choice, every memory, every step toward the stand. Authorities try to trace these acts, of course, but the mafia, skilled in leaving no fingerprints, relies on networks that operate just below the surface. The message might be delivered by a cousin's co-worker or a stranger with no known ties. It creates a fog of uncertainty that even the most thorough investigations can't fully pierce. And yet, witnesses go on. They save the voicemails. They report the notes. They tuck away the gifts with trembling hands and add them to files, hoping that one day justice will find its footing. Each small act of documentation is a way of reclaiming ground, a refusal to be silenced. In rare moments, these threats escalate. A rock through a window, a fire set just close enough to warn, not destroy. But more often, It's the waiting that wears a person down, the anticipation of something terrible that may never come, and still they speak, because to live under the weight of veiled threat is to carry a heavy kind of hope. The hope that your words, spoken in court, might one day make it safer for someone else to speak. That someday the phone will ring only for friends. That your mailbox will hold nothing more than bills and birthday cards. So if ever you wonder what bravery looks like, think not just of the bold and loud, but of the quiet keeper of truth who reads a threatening letter, then steps into court. Anyway, their courage does not roar, it resists quietly in the face of shadows and veiled words. When intimidation comes knocking, it rarely knocks for the witness alone. One of the most chilling tactics used by organized crime is to shift the focus not on the one who testified, but on the ones they love. It begins subtly, like so many of these methods. A daughter comes home from school and mentions a man she didn't recognize, asking if she was your child. A neighbor says someone came by asking when your partner usually gets home. Innocent on the surface. These moments nest in the heart like thorns. The Mafia knows the most powerful fear is not for oneself, but for those we care for most. And so they touch the edge of the witness's world, the spouse's commute, the parents' habits, the child's routines. They want you to imagine them vulnerable, alone, afraid. And it works. Witnesses have described the unbearable feeling of watching their loved ones carry a burden they did not choose. A teenager who cannot sleep through the night. A partner who jumps at every unexpected knock. Family members who resent the choice to testify, not because it was wrong, but because they now share in its cost. This kind of pressure is particularly cruel because it reshapes love into guilt. The very relationships that gave a witness strength now weigh on their conscience. They ask themselves, did I make them targets? Did I do the right thing at too high a price? Even those in protection programs feel this sting. New towns, new names, but the same fear that somehow the past will catch up. That someone will trace the child's new school, or recognize the face of a spouse in a photo to publicly shared. Sometimes, protection is proactive. Families are relocated together. Special agents provide training and support. But still, the emotional toll builds. Birthdays celebrated with new names, friends lost, holiday traditions abandoned, and all the while, the knowledge that it was not just your life that changed, it was theirs. And for those who remain in place, who cannot or will not leave their homes, the risks grow sharper. There are stories of firebombs thrown into empty garages, of notes slipped into backpacks, of playground conversations where children repeat threats they do not fully understand. But even amid this darkness, there is a quieter truth. Some families grow stronger in the face of fear. They become each other's refuge. They speak in code, develop rituals of care. They learn how to move through a world that sees them differently now. And in that movement, in that refusal to break apart, there is resilience. There are stories. Two of family members standing beside the witness, not only in private but in court. A mother gripping her son's hand, a husband standing behind his wife as she takes the oath. These moments are not often captured on camera, but they echo in the soul. So let us remember that the courage of a witness is rarely theirs alone. It is shared by those who walk with them, who protect them, who fear for them and still stay. Tonight, as you hold close those dearest to you, let your thoughts drift toward these families. May we see in their quiet vigilance a lesson in love, in loyalty, and in the cost of truth. They did not choose this path, but they walk it dashed together. In a perfect world, those who bravely testify against the Mafia would be shielded by an unbreakable wall of law, wrapped in safety and support. But in reality, the system designed to protect them is often patchwork at best, well-meaning, yet riddled with gaps through which danger too easily seeps. The Witness Security Program, or WITSEC, is the most well-known of these protective measures. Established in 1970, it offers new identities, relocation, and a lifeline to those willing to speak against criminal syndicates. And for many, it has worked. Tens of thousands have entered the program and gone on to live quiet, hidden lives. But protection is not perfection. Many witnesses find that life in WITSEC is not just different, it is alien. You leave behind not only your name but your history. You can't contact old friends. You must abandon social media, career ambitions, even distant relatives who might unknowingly reveal your whereabouts. It's a kind of safety that comes at the cost of connection. And for some, the promises of protection fall short. Bureaucratic missteps, budget constraints, and occasional human error have left witnesses exposed. There are cases where the Mafia found relocated individuals, not through high-tech means, but through community whispers or overlooked records. When you are hunted by those with long memories and longer arms, even a single mistake can be fatal. Then there are those who are not deemed eligible for full protection, whose testimony is considered valuable, but not critical. They may be offered a short-term safe house, a temporary guard detail, or nothing at all. They are left to navigate the aftermath with only a phone number to call in case of emergency. Like a swimmer tossed into the sea with a flare but no raft. The legal process itself is also perilous. Witnesses must often testify in open court, their identities known to the accused and their associates. Though some trials permit voice distortion or screens, these are exceptions. In most cases, the face of the witness is laid bare for all to see, recorded forever in transcripts and memories. Even before testifying, the road is strewn with risks. Subpoenas arrive in the mail, unintentionally tipping off neighbors. Investigators visit homes and workplaces, attracting attention. Court appearances are scheduled with little flexibility, regardless of the witness's circumstances. In such a fragile system, the burden often shifts back to the witness. They become their own protectors, changing routines, buying security, cameras, teaching their children how to react if followed. Some turn to private security. Others live with the quiet dread that they are utterly alone. And yet, what is perhaps most heartbreaking is how rarely these stories are told. The failures of the system are often buried, their victims forgotten. A witness who disappears is not front-page news. A threat not carried out never makes the record. Still, some fight to improve the system. Former witnesses speak out under aliases. Advocates push for reforms, better training, deeper psychological support, legal anonymity where possible. There is hope, but it moves slowly. So tonight, let us honor not just the courage of the witnesses, but the complicated, imperfect system that tries and sometimes fails to shield them. Let us hold both truths in our hearts, that protection can save lives, and that it must do better, because no one who risks everything to tell the truth should ever feel like the world has turned its back. There is a weight that lingers in the chest of those who have testified, a heaviness not always visible, but always felt. It is the companion of fear, a shadow that trails behind them through supermarket aisles, along school drop-offs, into dreams. Living in fear is not just a phrase, it is a state of being. The mind, once accustomed to routines and normalcy, now flinches at subtle changes. A car parked too long on the street, a stranger's second glance, a phone call that hangs up too quickly. These aren't just inconveniences, they are potential signs, warnings, reminders that the past is never fully gone. And with every perceived threat comes the rush of adrenaline, the spiraling thoughts. Is this it? Is this the moment they find me? That cycle, repeated over weeks, months, sometimes years, erodes more than comfort. It chips away at identity, at trust in the world, at one's ability to simply be. Insomnia becomes common. Not the kind where one tosses and turns for an hour, but the kind where sleep feels dangerous, where every creak of the house is a possible intruder, every dream morphs into nightmare. Over time, the body pays a price, tension etched into shoulders, stomachs twisted in knots, hearts racing through the night. Many witnesses suffer from what professionals might call complex trauma. It is not the trauma of a single violent act, but the ongoing strain of being a target. It is vigilance that cannot rest. It is anxiety with no clear endpoint. And because much of this fear remains unspoken, hidden, even from loved ones, it grows in the silence. Children of witnesses feel it too. They may not know the details, but they sense the tension. They learn to keep secrets. They learn to be careful, and sometimes they internalize the dread before they even have words for it. And what of the witnesses who return to courtrooms again and again, called to testify in appeals or related cases? Each appearance is a reopening of wounds, a re-entry into a space of exposure. They relive their decision. They relive the threats. And when the trial ends, the fear doesn't. Even in protection, the psychological toll persists. New names and new towns may hide the body, but the mind still remembers. Witnesses have spoken of the dissonance they feel, being someone else on paper, but carrying the same weight inside. They feel fragmented, like characters in a story they didn't write. Support exists, but access varies. Some receive counseling, an ongoing psychological care. Others are left to manage on their own, their trauma filed away with their old identities. They move through life like actors in an endless play, always watching the exits. And yet, through all this, many endure. They find ways to breathe through the fear, to build routines that offer moments of peace. Some write, some garden, some find strength in faith or friendship, or simply in the passing of time. One former witness, now years removed from the courtroom, said it best: "I don't know if the fear ever really goes away, but I've learned to live beside it. Like a neighbor I don't trust but must coexist with. I can't pretend it isn't there, but I also won't let it rule me." So, as we end this chapter, dear listener, let us hold space for that kind of resilience, the quiet strength of those who live with fear, not by denying it, but by enduring it. And if you too carry a weight of your own, know this: you are not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is keep going, even when the world feels uncertain, even when we are afraid. Asterisk: in the world of the Mafia, blood runs thicker than law. Family is not just ancestry, it is allegiance, a tether that binds in silence, debt, and memory. And when one is called to testify against their own, the tether strains under unbearable weight. For many witnesses, the person on the other side of the courtroom isn't a stranger. It's a cousin who carried them home after a scraped knee, an uncle who told bedtime stories, a father who once cradled them with pride. These aren't just defendants, they are pillars of a personal past, To betray a mafia figure is one thing. To betray family within the mafia is another. The mafia, after all, presents itself not only as an organization, but as a family uniter, chosen kinship that often overlays the real one. Loyalty is expected not just professionally, but personally. It is drilled in from the earliest age. You protect your own, no matter what. You do not speak, you do not question, you do not expose. So imagine, dear listener, the torment of a young man who testifies against the brother who once saved him from bullies, or a daughter forced to recount crimes committed by the father who walked her down the aisle. The conflict is not only moral, it is visceral. They are called rats, traitors, disgraces to their bloodline. And yet, what they have done is not a betrayal of values, it is an affirmation of them. They have chosen a broader sense of justice over inherited loyalty. They have chosen what is right, even when it tears at the very seams of their identity. But the cost is immense. These witnesses are not just ostracized from the criminal world, they are severed from family trees. Holidays pass with empty chairs. Photos are torn from albums. Stories of childhood are rewritten to erase their name. And yet, even amid such loss, many hold on to something truer than blood: integrity. They know that real love cannot thrive in silence, that protection rooted in fear is not family, but captivity. Some never stop mourning what they gave up. Others find new kinship in unexpected places, in those who stood by them, in the families they build after. They learn that loyalty, when blind, can be a chain. But when it is earned and chosen, it can also be a lifeline. So tonight, let us remember those who broke not just omerta, but lineage, who stepped away from everything familiar, to forge a path built not on allegiance, but on truth. They are not traitors, they are the bravest of kin. Now, dear listener, let us lower our voices and step gently into stories not easily told. The tales of those who testified not against enemies, but against the very people who shared their dinner tables, their laughter, their names. These stories are raw, complex, and steeped in sorrow. One such voice is that of Alina, who at just 23 stood in federal court to testify against her father. Her testimony was not dramatic, it was soft, trembling, matter-of-fact. She spoke of ledgers kept in the back of a pizza shop, of late-night deliveries that were never logged, of whispered instructions never meant for her ears. When asked why she spoke, she said, "Because I couldn't let him turn my little brother into him." Her father never looked at her during the trial, not once. And when he was sentenced, he only said, "You were always your mother's child." It broke her, but it also freed her. In the years that followed, she moved 3 times, changed her name, and slowly, gently, began to rebuild. Or consider the story of Vincent, a former enforcer for a New Jersey crew. He turned witness after his nephew, boy he loved like a son, was caught up in a violent exchange gone wrong. Vincent testified against men he had once bled for, including his own cousin, Marco, who had risen through the ranks with a mix of charm and brutality. When asked what it was like to face Marco across the courtroom, Vincent said, "It felt like stabbing my past. But I kept thinking, what if my nephew had died? Would Marco have mourned him, or just written him off as the cost of business? I couldn't pretend anymore." Vincent now works as a groundskeeper at a quiet school in the Midwest. He speaks little of his past, but once told a teacher over coffee, "I'm not proud, but I'm at peace." These are not clean tales of heroism. They are steeped in contradiction, in love twisted by betrayal, in loyalty transformed by conscience. And there are others, countless others, whose stories never make it to paper. A sister who testified against a brother's racketeering empire. A son who reported his uncle's laundering scheme. A cousin who quietly passed along names to the authorities, knowing she'd never be welcomed at a family gathering again. Each of these choices comes with a reckoning. Sometimes it's rejection. Sometimes it's grief. Often it is both. These witnesses mourn what they lose, even as they know they were right to speak. But there is grace, too, in these accounts. There is the grace of knowing that family is not defined by blood alone. That courage sometimes means standing apart from what you were taught in order to protect what you believe. So let us carry these stories gently. Let us remember that behind each name in a courtroom transcript, there is a beating heart, a fractured love, a soul doing the best it can with an impossible choice. And if you've ever felt torn between love and truth, know that you're not alone. These witnesses, these brave, burdened souls, walked that same path, and they are still walking, one quiet step at a time, to the outside world. A witness who turns on family may be lauded as heroic, but inside the soul of that person, the truth is rarely so clear. Testifying against kin is not a decision made lightly, nor without internal war. It is not a straightforward betrayal, it is a labyrinth of questions, regrets, and haunting what-ifs. The term rat is spat with venom in such circles, not just because of what it means legally, but what it implies morally. A traitor, a coward, one who shatters bonds. And yet, when we look closer, we see something deeper. These choices are rarely acts of disloyalty, they are acts of integrity, forged in fire. Consider a young man named Paul, who grew up idolizing his older brother, Anthony, a charismatic lieutenant in the local Mafia. Paul was the quiet one, the observer. When Anthony was arrested, it was Paul's own testimony that sealed his fate. People call it betrayal, Paul once said. But Anthony betrayed me first when he dragged our family into danger, when he brought violence into our home. That moral reckoning, when familial love collides with public harms, the crucible in which these decisions are made. For many, the decision to testify is rooted in love. Love for the younger sibling they want to shield. Love for a parent whose heart is breaking. Love for the person they once were, before crime warped the shape of family into something unrecognizable. Still, the guilt endures. Not because the choice was wrong, but because it came at such a high cost. One can carry both conviction and sorrow at once. Many do some wrestle with faith. In confessions to priests, in conversations with rabbis, in whispered prayers, they seek absolution not for their testimony, but for their grief. They ask, can doing the right thing still make me a good son, a good cousin, a good person? The answer, dear listener, lies not in absolutes, but in grace. These choices are moral mazes. There is no single right path, only a direction that feels most true. And often, the most courageous direction is the one that costs the most bravery. In these moments is not the absence of doubt, it is the choice to walk through doubt, to keep going when your heart feels torn in two. So let us speak softly of these souls, not with judgment, but with deep compassion. Let us honor the bravery it takes to untangle love from loyalty, truth from tradition. For when they chose to testify, they did not turn their backs on family. They turned their faces toward justice and carried love with them, even into the storm. When family bonds are broken by testimony, the rift often runs deeper than the courtroom. Estrangement becomes a shadow that lengthens over time, settling not just between individuals, but within them. It is a slow, aching grief, one not triggered by death, but by distance, misunderstanding, and the absence of reconciliation. Many witnesses report the same pattern. First, silence. Then the stares, the unreturned calls, the family gatherings to which they are no longer invited. Entire branches of kin cut them off. Not in rage, necessarily, but in withdrawal. A quiet deletion. This grief is layered. It is not only the pain of separation, but the memory of what once was. Holidays filled with warmth, childhood laughter echoing down hallways. The familiar smell of sauce bubbling on the stove wall, replaced by the emptiness of estrangement. There are no funerals for these relationships, no closure. Some witnesses try to bridge the gap. They send letters, they make calls, they explain their reasons, not to justify, but to share the burden. Sometimes those messages are met with understanding. More often, they are met with nothing at all. One former witness shared a story of his sister, who sent back every birthday card he mailed, unopened. "I didn't want her forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted her to know I still loved her, even if she never wanted to speak to me again." Others carry the wound inward. They become hesitant to form new bonds, afraid that any new connection might one day sour under the same weight. They grieve not only for the family they lost, but for the future family they may never build. Some turn to therapy, to spiritual guidance, to quiet rituals of remembrance. They light candles for those who no longer speak to them. They keep photos, tucked away in drawers. They find ways to honor love without reopening wounds. And yet, in all this sorrow, there is still a kind of beauty, the strength it takes to carry on, the love that lingers even after rejection, the hope that, perhaps one day, healing might begin, because time is strange. And while some wounds never fully close, others soften. A call years later, a card on a milestone birthday, a tentative handshake at a wedding. Small gestures that say, "I remember, I see you." So tonight, dear listener, if you carry your own estrangement, know this: you are not alone. There are others walking this same tender road. Others who chose truth and paid for it in silence. Let us hold space for them in our hearts. And if reconciliation never comes, let us still honor the love that once was, because even broken ties are woven from something precious, and even unhealed wounds are proof that we once dared to care. Some farewells are spoken, others are simply lived. For those who testify against the Mafia, especially against family, their goodbyes are often the latter, wordless, gradual, and irrevocable. They don't happen in courtrooms, but in quiet departures, missed milestones, and the aching silence of absence. The cost of choosing justice is rarely just legal. It is emotional, spiritual. It's a goodbye to normalcy, to tradition, to the life once lived freely. The witness becomes a ghost to their own history, someone whose presence stirs unease at gatherings, whose name becomes a whisper or a warning. And yet, many never regret the choice itself. They regret what it required. Imagine a man sitting at the edge of his daughter's wedding photo, his image edited in digitally because he couldn't attend in person. Or a woman celebrating Christmas under a different name in a town where no one knows who she used to be. These are not cinematic sacrifices. They are deeply human. Some farewell moments are painfully symbolic. The turning in of a family heirloom, the closing of a beloved home, the simple act of leaving behind a grave one can no longer visit. In these moments, testimony feels not like an action, but a thresholder crossing into a life that cannot be reversed. And yet, even here, something shines through. There is peace, too, in these silent goodbyes. A peace that comes not from comfort, but from clarity. The clarity of having done what one believed was right, even if it cost everything. Many witnesses speak of finding themselves in the quiet that followed, of learning who they were without the weight of the past, of rediscovering their voice in the absence of approval. These are not stories of regret, they are stories of resilience. And so we remember them tonight. The ones who left letters instead of explanations, who kissed sleeping children goodbye, unsure if they would ever return, who chose the heavy road, not because it was noble, but because it was necessary. Let us honor their choices, let us mourn their losses, and let us carry forward the wisdom of their sacrifice, that doing what is right may leave us with fewer goodbyes to say in the end, because the world, however imperfect, becomes just a little safer for the ones we love, and that, dear listener, is a goodbye worth the cost. Asterisk, as we step into the bright, almost unforgiving light of the courtroom's public gaze, let us pause and consider not just the judge or jury, but the lens through which the world watched the cameras, the sketch pads, the columns written with breathless anticipation. For in many Mafia trials, the courtroom did not simply serve justice, it staged a performance. Some witnesses walked into courtrooms thinking they were entering a room of law and order, only to find themselves caught in a theater of eyes. Journalists clutched notepads like relics. Courtroom artists captured every furrow of the brow, and outside, satellite trucks blinked like sentinels. A simple step onto the witness stand could become a national moment. For high-profile cases, media swarms descended with the fervor of a storm. The public, starved for drama and myth, consumed every detail. Newspapers spun tales of mob families with Shakespearean flair, of backroom betrayals and blood feuds. Television anchors introduced witnesses like characters in a saga casting, some as martyrs, others as villains. And the witnesses, they often became unwilling actors. Their names splashed across headlines, their faces sketched with bold strokes, their words quoted out of context, their fears reduced to clickbait. Imagine, dear listener, trying to protect your children while your testimony becomes the subject of late-night debate and morning radio mockery. The spectacle had consequences. For some, it meant danger. Their visibility invited retaliation, threats, harassment. For others, it meant alienation. Neighbors turned wary. Co-workers distanced themselves. Employers quietly closed doors. One witness, interviewed under protection, said, "I thought I was helping, but the press made me a symbol, and that made me a target." And yet, it must be said, the media also brought sunlight. Their presence ensured some accountability, some record of what was said and done. For every misleading headline, there were journalists who told the truth, who honored the risk these witnesses took. Still, the courtroom as public stage remains a double-edged sword. Justice demands transparency, but safety sometimes asks for shadow. So let us hold space for the conflict, for the stories made louder than they should have been and the ones never told at all. Let us remember that behind every headline was a person, often afraid, always human, and let us ask, in our hunger for story, did we see the cost of the telling? There is something haunting about a courtroom sketch pastel rendering on rough paper that captures a moment both public and deeply personal. For many witnesses, it is their first encounter with immortality in the public eye. not fame by choice, but by consequence. Before the advent of courtroom cameras, these sketches were often the only visual record permitted. Artists would sit with sharpened pencils and keen eyes, etching every furrowed brow, every pursed lip. And while some drawings offered dignity, others emphasized drama. A lowered gaze might be drawn as shame, a tear as weakness, a stiff posture as guilt, the truth of a moment, reinterpreted by charcoal. Then came the headlines. Newspapers picked them up like signals from another world. Star witness breaks down on stand. Mobster's sister spills secrets, tears, lies, and loyalty in courtroom showdown. Witnesses became caricatures, flattened into narratives meant to sell papers, not convey truth. One man, who testified against his former boss, later said, "I didn't recognize myself. Not in the drawing, not in the words. It was like watching someone else live my worst day." These portrayals carried power. In the minds of the public, they often defined the witness more than the testimony itself. A headline could sway perception. A photograph taken outside. The courthouse could linger in memory long after the verdict. And for those trying to remain anonymous, this visibility was a curse. Some begged for privacy. Some asked reporters not to photograph their children. Many got no such courtesy. But there were exceptions. A few journalists took the time to listen, to sit through entire testimonies, to understand context. Their articles didn't sell as many papers, but they offered something more valuable: humanity. Still, the damage was done. Witnesses would return home more to the safe house and see themselves staring back from newsstands. Their new identities, stained with the ink of their pasts, and for the communities they left behind, these sketches and headlines became memory. Neighbors clipped articles, former friends whispered over coffee. A story half understood grew into legend. So let us remember, for every name printed, there was a heart beating fast beneath that headline. A person who chose to speak, and paid for it not just in danger, but in exposure. We remember them not as symbols, but as souls, and we ask not just what their stories meant to the case, but what the case did to their stories. As technology advanced, and the public thirst for transparency grew, the idea of placing cameras in courtrooms became not just a possibility, but a battleground. On one side stood advocates for openness, those who believed justice must be seen to be trusted. On the other were the voices of caution, many of them former witnesses, whispering from the shadows, "Some things are too dangerous to display." For witnesses in Mafia trials, the presence of cameras could feel like a breach of the fragile line between duty and danger. A face, once caught on video, can be shared, endlessly replayed, paused, magnified, frozen in a screenshot. What might be a brief moment of truth becomes a permanent vulnerability. Some courts banned cameras altogether for this reason. Others permitted limited coverage-angled views, no shots of witnesses. But the inconsistency created confusion and anxiety. Witnesses entered courtrooms uncertain if they'd leave anonymous or known by millions. There were cases where witnesses testified behind screens or through voice distortion. But these measures, while helpful, could not erase the risk that someone, somewhere, might still recognize them. A turn of phrase, a gesture, a whispered nickname. One woman, whose testimony helped convict a high-ranking mob boss, later learned that a clip of her statement had been leaked. "I wore a wig. I used a false name. But someone from my old neighborhood saw the footage and called my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in years. It nearly destroyed me. And yet, not all responses were rooted in fear. Some witnesses believed in the power of their own words. They wanted the world to hear their truth unfiltered. They stood tall, knowing the risks, because silence had already done enough harm. The debate over cameras continues. Courts wrestle with balancing public interest and personal safety. Media outlets push for access. Advocacy groups push for boundaries. Meanwhile, the witnesses, often the most vulnerable in the room, wait to see whether their moment of courage will become tomorrow's trending clip. So we ask ourselves, in this age of unrelenting visibility, is seeing always believing? Or is there a wisdom in the unseen, in the quiet acts of bravery that unfold beyond the lens? Let us hold space for privacy, dear listener, because we fear the truth, but because we respect those who bear its weight. And let us remember that some of the most powerful testimonies echo loudest in silence. For a moment, a witness might be famous, their name trending, their story dissected in panel discussions, analyzed by legal commentators, even fictionalized in true crime dramas. But then, almost as quickly as it begins, the spotlight moves on seeking the next story, the next scandal. The public forgets, but the witness cannot. In the years that follow, they live in the wake of that brief exposure. Their name still lives online. Their voice still echoes in recordings. And while others move forward, the witness remains partly anchored to that moment, reshaped by a fame they never wanted. Job interviews become complicated. A quick internet search reveals more than a resume. Relationships feel tentative. What happens when someone connects the dots? When they realize who you used to be? Some try to scrub their digital footprints. Others change names, move cities, reinvent themselves. But the world rarely forgets completely. There's always someone who remembers. A cousin who saved the article. A stranger with a long memory. For those with children, the burden deepens. How to explain the past? How to protect their child from schoolyard whispers or online rumors? One witness described the ache of watching his teenage daughter stumble upon his testimony through a YouTube rabbit hole. She asked if I was ashamed. He said, "I told her I was scared, that I still am." There is a cruelty in how quickly the world moves on. It forgets the courage it once applauded, the fear it once consumed with fascination. The story ends in the public eye, but for the witness, it is still being written. And yet, many do find peace, not by erasing the past, but by outgrowing it. They build new lives, quieter lives. They mentor others. They work in fields where anonymity is respected. One woman started a small flower shop in a town where no one knew her story. She said, "Every bouquet I make is a reminder that something beautiful can still come from all that pain." So let us be careful with the stories we consume. Let us not forget the people inside them. And let us never assume that the end of the headline marks the end of the journey. For those who stood up, spoke out, and disappeared from Vuno, that your voice still matters, even if the world has moved on. Your truth remains at the end of every article. Beyond the final frame of every sketch, there lives a truth that rarely makes it into print. The witness is not a character. They are a person, a whole, complex, living soul. They once had favorite songs. A corner cafe where the barista knew their order. A bookshelf filled with photo albums. They held hands. They sang off-key in the car. They forgot birthdays sometimes and remembered anniversaries too well. They were, in every way. It was from that ordinariness that their courage emerged. When we see them only through the lens of the trial, we miss everything that made their testimony brave. Not because they were flawless, but because they were human, vulnerable, scared, sometimes reluctant, and still they spoke. There is something deeply sacred in bearing witness, not just to a crime, but to the truth, to the weight of what really happened, held gently in trembling hands. These people did not seek the spotlight. Most would have done anything to avoid it. But when the time came, they chose to stand up, and they stood alone. We forget, sometimes, that even courage has a cost, that even truth-tellers need someone to say, "I see you, I believe you. You are more than the worst day of your life, so let this be that moment, dear listener. Let this story be a lantern lit in honor of those who carried light into dark places. Let us see them fully not as icons or martyrs, but as neighbors, friends, family, as people who made a choice in a world eager for headlines. May we seek out the footnotes. In a culture hungry for scandal, may we remember the sanctity of small truths. And in the silence after the verdict, may we whisper a quiet thank you to the ones who dared to speak. Your story matters. You matter, and we remember you not just for what you did, but for who you are. Asterisk, imagine standing at a crossroads where each direction leads to a different self. One path is steeped in danger, steeped in memory. The other is blank, unpainted, waiting. To enter witness protection is to choose that unwritten path, knowing you will never walk the old road again. The decision to disappear is not made in haste. It is often offered after sleepless nights, cautious conversations, and whispered promises from us marshals who understand the stakes. The person must choose to leave behind not just a name, but a past friends, family, home, history. Some decide quickly, driven by fear or love, or the need to protect someone else. Others hesitate, clinging to roots even as danger creeps closer. But once the decision is made, the transformation begins swiftly. One morning, they are a local teacher, a restaurant owner, a familiar face. By nightfall, they are a file number, a blank passport, a newly assigned future. The government arranges the relocation, new identification documents, housing in a distant city, employment assistance. These are the bones of a new life. But flesh and spirit take longer to rebuild. For many, there is a surreal period of limbo. The world around them carries on, unaware that a new life has quietly joined its rhythm. The emotional toll is immense. Some describe it as grieving one's own death. Birthdays pass unacknowledged. Family photographs are tucked away. Old accents must be softened. Habits relearned. A favorite dish abandoned because it might tie one to the old world. And yet, in this vast silence, some find a strange peace. No one knows who they were. No one looks at them with suspicion. It is a reset, a rebirth. The fears of the past fade slowly, replaced by cautious hope. Still, there are nights when memory stirs, when they whisper their real name to the mirror, just to remember the sound. When they dream of old streets, old laughter, when the scent of something garlic, cologne, winter smoke unearths everything they thought they buried. So we honor those who chose the quiet courage of disappearance, not as a surrender, but as a vow to protect what mattered most, to begin again even when it hurt, to live not as who they were, but as who they might still become. To reinvent oneself is not simply to change labels, it is to soften every edge of memory, to place each piece of the old self behind invisible glass. For those entering witness protection, Reinvention is not just suggested, it is required. New names are not chosen whimsically, but assigned with care, crafted to blend in, to obscure, to survive. This process begins with new documentation, birth certificates, social security numbers, even school records, each piece fabricated not with malice, but with the delicate precision of a life rebuilt. The old name is sealed, the new one becomes legal truth. Then comes geography. Witnesses are relocated to unfamiliar places, quiet suburbs, small cities, sometimes even different regions of the country. The selection considers language, culture, employment potential. A former New Yorker might find themselves in rural Idaho, a Boston native, now somewhere under Texas skies. And here, in this strange new world, the slow work begins. They learn how to speak again, not literally, but contextually. They craft stories where they're from, what brought them here, why they don't have relatives nearby. These small fictions must be told with ease, because to stumble could mean exposure. They adjust their habits. The coffee shop becomes a drive-through. Friendships are cautiously curated. Social media is avoided, sometimes forbidden. Every photograph is considered through the lens of safety. Jobs are found with the help of the U.S. Marshals Service. Some are mundane warehouse positions, clerical work, others more fitting to past experience, as long as those skills don't reveal too much. But whatever the path, the witness must begin again as a stranger to all. Children, too, must adapt. They learn to answer to new names. They are told not to speak of their past. School forms are filled with invented history. And though they may not fully understand the danger, they feel the weight of the shift. There is a quiet bravery in this transformation, a dignity in each small, careful step. The courage not just to survive, but to rebuild with integrity and restraint. And so, dear listener, when we think of reinvention, let us not imagine glamour. Let us see, instead, the quiet resolve it takes to rename oneself, not to forget, but to endure. To say, each day, in every new interaction, I am still here. I am still becoming. Safety, once achieved, can be strangely hollow. For witnesses and protection, the absence of threat does not always mean the presence of peace. The reality of starting over comes with a toll few outsiders fully understand: a persistent, gnawing loneliness. It begins with the lack of history. In a new town, you are a person without a past. There are no familiar landmarks to tie your memories. 2. No shared recollections with neighbors. Introductions become performances, with no real truth behind them. You are safe, but you are no longer known. Holidays pass quietly. Birthdays go unacknowledged by the people who once mattered most. Phone calls to old friends are forbidden, and letters risk exposure. Even laughter feels quieter, tinged with a grief that has no grave. Romantic relationships become especially fraught. What can you share? How can you explain your evasiveness, your hidden sadness? Every budding connection carries the shadow of a secret too dangerous to tell. Many witnesses, despite yearning for closeness, choose isolation. It feels safer that way for everyone. And then there is the homesickness, not just for place, but for belonging, for the casual way a friend says your name, for the nod of an old neighbor who knows your story without asking, for the sense of rootedness that only time and trust can build. This is the hidden price of protection: safety without community, life without witness. For some, it feels like being erased while still alive. But even here, in this desert of disconnection, small seeds of healing can take root. A kind co-worker, A neighbor who waves each morning, a pet who waits at the door. These are the gentle bridges back to belonging. Some witnesses find purpose in solitude. They volunteer anonymously. They write under pseudonyms. They tend gardens, start routines, build quiet legacies no one will trace back to the name they once carried. So let us remember, survival is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of another, lonelier, and often braver path. And those who walk, if though they may seem invisible, carry with them a strength forged in silence. They have chosen life, not just once in the courtroom, but every morning after. And that, dear listener, is no small act of courage. It is no small thing to try to belong in a life that feels borrowed. For witnesses under protection, each effort at connection can carry the weight of unreality friendships formed on the scaffold of a carefully edited truth. When you cannot share your origins, your memories, or the milestones that shaped you, friendships become exercises in performance. Coffee chats, book clubs, neighborhood barbecues, these are the familiar rituals of community. But, for the protected witness, they often come with a deep undercurrent of distance, trust. That most precious currency becomes hard to earn and harder to give. What do you say when someone asks about your childhood, your wedding, your parents? These simple questions are treacherous ground, and every answer must be scrubbed of detail, polished into generalities. And yet, the need to belong remains powerful. Some manage it in pieces. They join groups with a shared interest, gardening, crafting, faith. They speak less, listen more. In time, small bonds form. A neighbor who offers tomatoes from their garden. A co-worker who invites them to lunch. These moments, though fragile, become lifelines. But even as relationships grow, so too does the quiet fear. If they knew who I really was, would they still welcome me? Sometimes a slip occurs, a phrase too specific, a fact inconsistent with the story. Eyes narrow. A question is repeated. The heart races. Will they press further or let it lie? Will this be the end of safety or simply a lesson learned? Children make this all the more delicate. Their honesty can be unpredictable. They speak of places they shouldn't remember, of names they no longer go by. Parents in witness protection become vigilant guardians, not just of safety, but of narrative. And then there are the friendships that must be ended. A connection becomes too close. A friend begins to pry. And so the witness pulls back, cancels. Plans, becomes distant. It is a pattern they know well. Still, some friendships endure, built slowly, without expectation, rooted not in shared pasts, but in quiet consistency. A smile at the mailbox, a helping hand during a storm. Trust, not as a gift, but as a slow-growing vine. For those in witness protection, the journey to belonging is not about reclaiming the past, it is about building a future, one gentle step at a time. And for the rest of us, may we remember that every stranger carries a story, some spoken, some sealed, and kindness, freely given, may mean more than we ever know, even under a new sky. With a new name and a carefully crafted life, the past has a way of reaching out. It rarely arrives in the form of confrontation. It tiptoes in through dreams, memories, and sometimes through chance. For some, the reminder comes gently, a familiar song playing in a grocery store, the scent of a dish they haven't tasted in years. Others experience it more jarringly, a stranger with a knowing glance, a letter forwarded by mistake, a name overheard that sends chills up the spine. The most terrifying moments are the close calls. The old acquaintance who visits town, the distant cousin who moves nearby, the face that looks too familiar to ignore. Witnesses are trained to remain calm, to retreat quietly, to alert their contacts in the program. But the anxiety never fully dissipates. Technology makes hiding harder. Facial recognition, social media, online databases, all tools for connection, but also for discovery. Even a seemingly innocent post can unravel years of careful protection. One witness, after a decade of safety, was recognized in a photograph on someone else's Facebook feed. A holiday party snapshot, a background blur that became a threat, and yet the past isn't always an enemy. Sometimes it arrives with grace. A letter from a forgiven family member, news of a former neighborhood changed for the better, a quiet assurance that the danger has passed, or at least grown distant. But the witness remains watchful, not paranoid, but prepared. They change routines, they vary travel paths, they avoid habits that could lead to exposure. The lessons of the courtroom and the protection program live on, etched into daily life. Still, they hope that one day the past won't matter so much, that who they are now will be enough, that their new life will no longer feel like a mask, but a home. So, if ever you meet someone who seems both grounded and guarded, kind but quiet, remember, some souls carry whole histories in silence, and some names have been spoken in rooms where truth was the only weapon. To all who live bravely under borrowed stars. We see you, and we honor the story you cannot share. Asterisk in the quiet of midnight, beneath the hum of an unfamiliar refrigerator, or the ticking of a second-hand clock, many witnesses have sat down to write, not to report or testify, but to say what was never said. These letters, never sent, are often addressed to those left behind, parents who never understood the decision, siblings who stayed silent, lovers who vanished when the trial began. In the safety of ink and paper, the witness tells their side not for vindication, but for peace. They write of fear, the kind that crept into dreams and lingered in the spaces between sentences in court. They write of guilt, not always over what was done, but over what had to be done, of friendships abandoned, of futures cut short. They remember birthdays missed, recipes never cooked again, places they will never walk without glancing over a shoulder. Some letters are angry. They speak to betrayal, of being silenced by those who once called them family. Others are full of longing, saturated with the hope that someone, somewhere, still remembers them kindly. And sometimes the letters are to themselves, written in second person. A bomb, a reckoning, an attempt to remind the self that chose to speak, that they did the right thing. They write about the life they lived before the cadence of a neighborhood, the specific way sunlight filtered through their old kitchen window, the chorus of voices at Sunday dinners. They mourn those details, not because they long to return, but because they know they can never be retrieved. Some letters are laced with humor, in spite of it all. Jokes only one sibling would understand. Nicknames once yelled across playgrounds. A smile pressed gently between lines of sadness, and some are ritualistic, written every year on the same date: a parent's birthday, a wedding anniversary, the day they entered protection. These dates become quiet altars. The letter, a candle, burned, if only briefly, for what once was. Not all letters are kept. Some are burned, watched curl into ash as if releasing grief into smoke. Some are buried under trees or beneath beds, unread by anyone but the writer. Others are lost in moves, left behind like shadows too heavy to carry, but a few survive. Tucked in envelopes, inside journals, beneath false bottom drawers. Proof that even when voice is stolen from the public square, it can still whisper in private, and in these letters there is healing. For the writer, the act is a reclaiming of such chance to say, at last, this is my truth, even if no one ever reads it. For us, dear listener, it is a gentle reminder. Some stories live not on the record, but in the heart. So if ever you find a letter with no address, no signature, know that it may have come from someone who once stood in a courtroom with trembling hands, who once traded their name for safety, who once chose light in a world of shadow. Let us honor their words, even the ones they could never say aloud. Long after the courtroom lights dim and the last signatures are filed, memory remains. For witnesses, it is not just the conscious recollections that linger, it is the dreams, the nightmares, the quiet subconscious haunting that arrives when the world goes still. In dreams, the past is rarely linear. A child's face blends into a jury box. A hallway leads to a courtroom, then to a familiar kitchen, then to a stranger's garage. These are the mind's collages, filtered, unnerving. Some witnesses speak of recurring dreams, the kind that loops every few weeks or months, testifying again, but this time their voice is gone, or they're back in their old neighborhood, knowing they shouldn't be unable to escape. One woman said she dreamed often of being recognized in a grocery store by a man with no face, only the feeling of dread clinging to her like fog. Nightmares don't always feature violence. Often, it's the stillness that terrifies, the realization that something is wrong. The absence of control, the exposure, the feeling of being seen. These nighttime wanderings often come uninvited. They creep in during moments of peace, after long stretches of calm. They are reminders, not of what was done, but of what was risked and what might still be. And then there are the good dreams, the ones that wake the witness in tears of joy and sorrow alike. A dinner with family, a conversation with a parent long gone, a pet they had to leave behind. These dreams bring comfort, but also mourning. They are gifts wrapped in longing. Sleep becomes a threshold, a place where safety and danger blur. Some witnesses avoid sleep, pushing it off with late-night television or quiet walks. Others seek it desperately, clinging to the slivers of peace it sometimes offers. Therapists within the witness protection system understand this terrain. They call it subconscious recoil, the echo of trauma manifesting in symbolic form. It is not weakness, it is survival at work. Long after the moment has passed, some witnesses learn to navigate their dreams. They keep journals beside their beds. They speak the names aloud that they can't say in waking hours. They find, in these rituals, a reclamation of identity. Not public, but private. Not loud, but steady. And over time, some dreams begin to change. The courtroom fades. The voices soften. The memories become less sharp, less cruel. New faces appear. New places. A backyard garden. A child's laughter. A sunrise without fear. Still, the past never fully disappears, but it reshapes. It becomes part of the story, rather than the whole of it. So if you, dear listener, ever find yourself waking from a dream that feels like someone else's life, consider this. It might be the echo of a witness's truth, a life lived bravely in silence, a history remembered not in headlines, but in sleep. And let that bring you compassion. For, in the world of witnesshood, even rest must be earned. Strength is often misunderstood. It's imagined as something loud, forceful, commanding, obvious. But for the witnesses who vanish from the public eye, strength is something far quieter. It lives in restraint, in waiting, in choosing the long, difficult road of obscurity and silence over the flash of retaliation or revenge. The strength to stay hidden is not born from fear alone. It is cultivated from love. Love for a child's future, love for peace, love for the promise that perhaps, by stepping back, something good might be preserved. It takes a special kind of courage to be forgotten by the world for the sake of doing what is right. There are mornings that test this strength. Mornings when the news broadcasts a name you once knew. Mornings when someone's success, someone's obituary reminds you of the life you left behind. The grief rises uninvited like a tide. But still, you dress. You go to work. You smile at the cashier. You carry on, and in this endurance, there is grace. Grace is what allows the witness to walk through life without bitterness. It is not perfection. It is not the absence of pain. Rather, it is the choice to meet pain with dignity, to sit with sorrow and let it soften, rather than harden, the soul. Grace is found in moments that no one sees. Quiet tears at the kitchen sink. Silent prayers in the early hours. Laughter that bubbles up unexpectedly over a shared joke with a neighbor who knows nothing of your past. These are the small, holy triumphs. Witnesses in protection often describe themselves as ghosts, not because they are invisible, but because they live among others with a kind of reverence, holding their presence gently, never wanting to disturb, and yet they are anything but hollow. They are the bearers of stories, of truth spoken at great cost. They are living proof that silence can be chosen not out of fear, but out of faith in law, in protection, in a better future. So, when we think of strength, let us remember them, not for their drama, but for their discipline, not for their battles, but for their boundaries, not for what they lost, but for what they saved. To endure quietly is one of the hardest things a person can do, and in that quiet, there is power. Let us honor it with our listening. Let us respect it with our silence. Let us carry their resilience forward, like a lantern lit not by flame, but by courage. Some stories are never told in public. They are not bound in books or captured in films. Yet, they pulse quietly through our society, shaping justice, redefining courage, and reminding us what sacrifice truly looks like. These are the stories of witnesses, those who stepped into the light and then slipped back into shadow. Why do these voices matter? Because they teach us something essential about humanity. They remind us that the arc of justice is not abstract, it is deeply personal. Each testimony given is a life rerouted, a family uprooted, a person transformed. These witnesses are the hinges on which justice turns. Without them, cases crumble. Without them, silence wins. Their stories are not just about crime. They are about choice, about resilience, about the enduring human belief in something better even when it comes at a cost. Even in silence, their voices reverberate. A conviction secured because one person dared to speak. A neighborhood a little safer because someone said no more. A child growing up free from the legacy of fear because a parent chose truth. To remember these voices is to widen our lens of heroism. It is to see courage, not just in defiance, but in devotion, in the long, quiet living of a life under new stars. They matter because they show us the weight of doing what's right. Not the cinematic version, but the real, soul-testing journey. The kind of strength that never seeks applause. The kind that keeps showing up, morning after morning. These stories also matter because they guard against forgetting. In a world hungry for spectacle, where courtrooms become theater and headlines replace nuance, we need reminders of what's real. The people who are never photographed. The names that aren't remembered but should be dot. So, if you've listened this far, dear traveler, let this final reflection rest with you. Behind every Mafia conviction, behind every closed courtroom door, behind every whisper in the dark, there was someone who chose to speak. They lost names, homes, sometimes even families, but they gave the rest of us something profound. A chance at justice, a glimmer of truth, a story worth honoring. May we carry their legacy not with fanfare, but with reverence, and may their courage, born in silence, echo gently in our own hearts. Whenever we are called to stand. And now, dear listener, we come to the soft close of our journey through dim courtrooms, shuttered windows, and whispers traded for safety. The path we have walked has been a long one, winding through the shadowed corridors of memory and the quiet, heavy-laden rooms where truth is weighed against survival. As our tale draws to its final, hushed conclusion, let us not hurry, let us not rush away from the stillness that now settles around us, like dust motes in the fading light. Let us sit a while in this quietude and reflect on what we have walked through together. Feel the weight of it. The faint, lingering scent of old paper and stale coffee, the phantom chill of a room where a difficult decision was made. Remember the texture of the silence, not empty, but filled with all that was left unsaid. This journey was never about reaching a destination in a hurry. It has always been about the quality of the listening, the depth of the understanding. It has been about allowing the echoes of these lives to resonate within the chambers of our own hearts, to find purchase there, and to change us. However subtly, in the end, this story has not been one of action alone, not of dramatic chases, or thunderous confrontations, though elements of these may have flickered at the edges of our narrative. Rather, it has been a story of endurance, an exploration of the profound, almost invisible strength required to simply persist. It has been a meditation on resilience, on the capacity of the human spirit to bend under immense pressure without breaking, to find hairline cracks in an oppressive wall through which a sliver of light might pass. We have seen how endurance is not a passive waiting, but an active, internal battle fought moment by moment. The choice to get out of bed when the day promises only fear. The decision to make a cup of tea when the hands tremble. The will to hold on to a core of selfhood when the world is trying to strip it away. It has also been a story of human fallibility. We have not dealt in saints or heroes cast in unblemished marble. Our characters, the souls we have come to know so intimately, were flawed. They were prone to doubt, to second-guessing, to the very human temptation of choosing the easier, safer path. We saw their moments of weakness, the instances where fear almost won, where the desire for a normal, untroubled life screamed louder than the call of conscience. And in witnessing their fallibility, we find a deeper, more accessible truth. Their courage is not diminished by their fear, it is defined by it. It is made real, tangible, and profoundly relatable. Their journey reminds us that true strength is not the absence of weakness, but the choice to act in spite of it and through it. All we have touched upon the difficult grace of doing what is right when the cost is immeasurably high. This is a grace that is not given freely, but earned through sacrifice. It is the grace of a conscience that, though heavy, is clear. The cost, as we have seen, is tallied in lost friendships, in estranged family, in names left behind and histories erased. It is the cost of looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger, of learning to live with a constant, low hum of anxiety, of knowing that a single knock on the door could unravel the fragile peace of a new life. And yet, this grace is a kind of internal sanctuary, a quiet, unassailable knowledge that, when the moment of reckoning came, one chose the side of truth, however lonely that side may be. The people we've met some fictional amalgams designed to protect the vulnerable, some drawn from the very real, frayed threads of history, all echoes of the same enduring truth. They are prisms, each reflecting a different facet of a single, brilliant, and often painful light. In their composite lives, we find the concentrated essence of countless stories, the distilled courage of many. They are a testament to the fact that justice, fragile as it is, as brittle as spun glass, depends not just on laws etched in stone or on the grandeur of institutions. It depends, in the final, crucial analysis, on hearts brave enough to bear witness. To bear witness is more than to simply see. It is an act of shouldering a burden. It is to take the weight of a memory, a truth, an injustice, and carry it from the darkness of secrecy into the harsh, unforgiving light of public record. It is to become a living vessel for a story that others would rather see buried. It is a profound act of translation, transforming the chaotic, painful reality of an event into the structured, formal language of testimony, a language that the world, in its best moments, is duty-bound to hear. These people, our quiet protagonists, became keepers of a flame, protecting it from the winds of denial and the downpour of intimidation, so that its light could one day illuminate a path for others. Therefore, let this final chapter be a kind of benediction. Let it be a gentle laying of hands, a quiet thank you to those who chose testimony over the seductive comfort of silence. They were offered the sanctuary of forgetting, the peace of anonymity, and they turned it down. They chose to step onto a stage they never asked for, under a spotlight they never desired, to speak a truth that would cost them almost everything. We honor that choice. And with that thanks comes a gentle honoring of their fear, their isolation, and their quiet strength. Let us honor the fear that lived in the pit of their stomachs, a cold and constant companion. The fear that made them check their locks 3 times, that made them flinch at sudden noises, that turned the friendly face of a stranger into a potential threat. Let us honor the profound isolation that followed their choice, a loneliness that can only be known by those who have been set apart by what they know. The empty chairs at their dinner tables, the phone calls that no longer came, the life lived behind drawn curtains, watching the world go on without them. And, above all, let us honor their quiet strength, not the strength of a battering ram, but the strength of a deep-rooted tree, weathering storm after storm. The strength that lies in the persistence of breath, in the rhythm of a beating heart, in the simple, profound act of continuing. May they find peace in their new lives, wherever those lives have taken them. May they discover the mundane, sacred joy of an ordinary Tuesday. May they feel the warmth of the sun on their face without scanning the horizon for a threat. May they learn to trust the smile of a neighbor, the laughter of a child in a park, the simple goodness that still exists in the world. May their peace be deep and restorative, a calm harbor after a long and brutal storm. May their past no longer hunt them. May the shadows of yesterday cease to lengthen across their floors. May the ghosts of old rooms and hushed conversations finally recede, their power broken, May they sleep through the night without the intrusion of old fears, and may they wake to a morning that feels genuinely new, unburdened by the weight of what came before. May the names they left behind become just that, names, no longer attached to a life of peril, but simply a closed chapter in a very long book. And may their stories, whispered in corners, chronicled in sealed documents, or buried deep beneath new names and new identities, remind us always of the cost of truth and the hope it still carries. May their legacy be a quiet, persistent reminder that institutions are only as strong as the integrity of the people within them, that silence, in the face of injustice, is a form of complicity, and that the moral architecture of our world is built, one brave testimony at a time. Their stories carry the hope that even a single voice, speaking a single unvarnished truth, can set in motion a change that outlives them. A ripple of consequence that they may never see, but that will, nonetheless, wash up on a future shore. So, tonight, as you lay your head to rest, as the world outside your window softens into slumber, hold close this truth we have uncovered together. Silence can be sacred, a necessary shield, a place of healing and reflection. But voices, however quiet, however trembling, can still change the world. A whisper, after all, is not powerful because of its volume, but because of its intimacy, its proximity to the ear of the listener. It demands that you lean in, that you pay attention. It is the quietest sounds that often carry the most important messages. And it is in the act of careful listening that we find our shared humanity. Wherever you are listening from, be it a bustling city apartment, a quiet house, in the countryside, or on a long, lonely drive under a canopy of stars, may peace follow you. May it not just trail behind you, but may it settle within you, a gentle and abiding presence in your own heart. And if your own path, in your own life, calls for courage not in a courtroom, perhaps, but in a classroom, an office, or at your own kitchen table, may the quiet strength of these stories walk beside you. May you remember that courage often does not roar. Most of the time, it is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I will try again tomorrow. Until next time, sleep well, and thank you for listening."